Segment 3, Gold and Black Live. Brian Newbert joins me, and we just had the general Dave Shondell Love Fest only because he's just such a. First, he's in the middle of practice today, and he comes and does our show, which, that's great. But also, he's just interesting. He always says something, and I learn something about coaching. And usually, the thing that's interesting, too, about him is it's not, his off-the-record stuff is somewhat similar to what he says on the record. He's just pretty good in terms of, I always learn something about coaching.
He's just honest.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can ever, honest is always interesting,
Yeah.
So.
And he's got,
because he's honest.
Yeah, and has done a terrific job. We didn't even get into recruiting and all that he's done there, which has been phenomenal. He continues to recruit at a very high level. This is a program in Purdue volleyball that will have a top 5 class again, I believe, coming in for this next year as well. So again, Purdue volleyball, and it's a great thing to go watch too if you haven't had the chance to do that. More and more people are doing that on a regular basis. All right, Brian, we've got some recruiting questions. Obviously, the big news this week coming out of Indianapolis and the Purdue men's basketball getting another commitment. C.J. Walker, I know you haven't been asked this question once this week, but you'll make it the 12th time. But what's he bring to the table? And if you haven't read our site, Brian's hit that about every way from Sunday.
Yeah, he's smart. He's tough. He's a complete point guard, or at least a lot more of a complete point guard than he was early in his career, and understand he still has 2 years of high school basketball left in front of him to get better. What's always struck me about him is when I first saw him when he was going into his freshman year at Tech or coming out of his freshman year, I can't remember which one it was, he was kind of an open court loose cannon where he would get up and down the floor pretty well, make highlight reel type of plays in the open court, but he'd offset them sometimes. He'd make one brilliant play and then he'd make a bad pass, or he'd try to do too much. But ever since then, he has really matured as a player. And you don't find many high school point guards anymore who've played with one great big man, let alone two.
Two, yeah.
In high school, he's been the starting point guard on a state title team. At least he was as a sophomore. That same core was there his freshman year too. So he was there to play with a lot of older players, to make them better, and to get the ball to Trey Lyles, one of the best big men in the country. Then in AAU, he plays with Caleb Swanigan, Purdue's obvious A1 spring recruiting target now. So he understands how to play with good big men, coexist with them, complement them, make them better. And you just can't overstate that, especially with kind of the model Purdue has going right now, where what they're going to try to do is they're always going to have a really good big man, and then a bunch of skilled guys around him. So the sheer fact Walker, at this young age of his development, already shows he can do some things in the open court, but he can also play a complete game in the half court. I think he's just a very well-rounded player, and he's played in a ton of big games. Indianapolis Tech was one of the best high school teams in the country. Last year, they played a couple of showcase games on ESPN. Right. They played in a state title game, and he did this as a freshman and sophomore. So in AAU, he played up as a 16-year-old against 17-year-old competition on the highly competitive EYBL circuit this past spring and summer. So he's played a lot of big games. He's played against great competition. He's always represented himself very well. He has a great personality. He's a natural leader. People like playing with him. He knows how to make people better. He's skilled enough to make an open shot. He's good in the open floor. He's a good ball handler, good passer. A very tough kid with great intangibles. When Purdue decided to need a point guard for 2016, he was the first guy they turned to, and the guy they absolutely wanted. So I think anytime a coaching staff, and they'd recruited him for years too, so they know exactly what they're getting into. And I just think he's exactly what Purdue wants nowadays in a point guard.
How big a deal on the whole, and we've had some questions about that from Indianapolis, getting a top flight guy out of Indianapolis. I mean, obviously Purdue has recruited there and tried to compete in recruiting there as well. It's 60 miles from West Lafayette, but any after effect of having a guy that you have a couple more years that could continue to blow up and become a does that mean anything, the fact of where he's from, or
sure it does. I should say basketball players in Indianapolis all know one another. That's sort of the way the environment nowadays in high school is. They all play against each other. They all play with each other in some capacity. They're all familiar with one another.
Yeah.
They understand how each other play. So when you have someone, other players in a specific city respect, like, and respect how they play basketball, that certainly can't hurt. So he's out there for the next 2 years on the Indianapolis high school circuit as kind of an ambassador for Purdue, and I think that there's certainly value there. I don't think that's going to, have a parade of the best players in Indianapolis beating down Purdue's door,
Yeah.
but it's certainly going to help. It's certainly not going to hurt.
Oh, and we want to get to our caption, which is men's basketball update. I want to get to a couple of these questions. One from Andy from Florida, our regular viewer on our show. Football recruits, and maybe a little bit early to talk about who would be visiting on the 8th of November, a noon start. But what is Purdue still in the running chance for running back Vaughn? And I'm drawing a blank on Keyshawn Vaughn from Tennessee.
I would call that a long shot at this point. Purdue obviously has done something well there to the point where they got him to make an official visit for the Michigan State game. He was impressed. He understands fully that Purdue's losing like 3 or 4 senior running backs, including its top 2 guys, and there's an opportunity there to come in and start right away, and that's very important. I always say this about recruits. The one thing they want to do more than anything is they want to play, especially kids from the Southeast or the SEC region who are very confident in their ability, which basically is 99% of kids from the SEC region. He is a running back from Nashville. Ohio State just offered him. That could be a potential game changer for him. If it's not, Tennessee's sitting right there with an offer on the table. Hometown Vanderbilt's offered him as well. Wisconsin, we all know what kind of appeal Wisconsin can have for running back. But Purdue has done something there. They can sell opportunity. They can sell a relationship. That was the first official visit he took, so there's got to be some legitimate interest there. But at the end of the day, I have a real hard time seeing them get him. But I wouldn't dismiss them completely.
Yeah. Have you seen in recruiting that Purdue has had, you talk about there must be something there. Purdue has had, obviously the early commitments, but are you seeing some signs even, and maybe it's too early to tell, that the impact of this program clearly taking a step forward, making a difference at this? I mean, is it that impossible to tell just with kids at this point?
It can't hurt. Certainly where it helps is the kids you already have committed. Had this season just been another chemical spill like last season's was, you would take all those kids who made that leap of faith on Purdue before the season, committed to Purdue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You would have to, at some point, doubt has to creep in. If you're committed to a school that wins 1 game next year and then comes back and wins 1 or 2 again and doesn't even look the part of a Big Ten program, at some point those kids are going to have doubt. And if the kids are good, they're going to have other options. So you have a serious retention issue on your hands. At the same time too is you have a lot of underclassmen coming to your home games right now, and you want to make early impressions on them for future classes. So when you have a bunch of 2016 kids who come to the Michigan State game and they see Purdue as a 3-touchdown underdog have the ball in its hands at the end of the 4th quarter, down 8 points with a chance to tie the game, that certainly makes a positive impression on them. The other part of it too is just the way recruiting works. Is opposing recruiters will use whatever they can when they're recruiting a kid against whoever they're recruiting against. So as I said before, if this season had gone like last season's, it would have been open season. For any kid that Purdue had to really recruit against other people seriously to get, it would have been open season on Purdue's coaches in terms of negative recruiting. People would start raising the question, well, how long is that coaching staff going to be there? Yada, yada, yada. They've won, 3-4 games in 2 years. That you don't want to go there. So Purdue, the sheer fact Purdue's shown some progress on the field potentially offsets some of that. There's always going to be negative recruiting. I mean, if Purdue all goes as planned now, and you're able to win 5 games this year, 5-6 games, I don't know, 6 might be unreasonable at this point, but if you're able to just show progress on the field, it's really hard for opposing coaches to credibly say, hey, that's a complete dumpster fire, don't go there.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing. Getting to some questions here, and this is one I know I think I can answer. When is your brother, because I didn't see when Dave was here, we would have asked him, going to get a head coaching job, and he was asking about John Shondell. And one thing that's been interesting about Dave Shondell's program in volleyball is how well he's kept his staff together during his, 12 years now at Purdue, I believe it is. And I don't see John going anywhere just because this is a pretty tight unit, but you never know. He's done a very good job here.
He certainly earned it.
Yeah, he has, and yet they have, there's all kinds of situations where it seems to be a good match, and the two seem to work well together, amazingly well together. And again, that entire staff has remained intact for a very long time. Another question about Martese Patterson. I don't know whether we know he's not in the program now.
He is in the program.
He is in the program,
yeah.
but I'm sorry, but just sitting out due to grades.
Yeah. I think he's a partial qualifier
Yeah.
or something like that. It doesn't matter. The academic part of it's irrelevant. He would have redshirted anyway, I'm quite certain. But they seem pretty high on him. I think Darrell Hazel said at his radio show yesterday something about him potentially being a special player. When you look at him, he's gigantic. Now, he's a little too gigantic right now. The biggest thing for him is he's got to get in shape.
Yeah.
But he's absolutely massive, and they seem to think that he's got a chance to be a really good player, a really good offensive guard. He certainly fits the prototype for a guard, a big, just massive, hulking human being.
All right, now we're going to get to what our liner says, men's basketball update. Obviously, Purdue men's basketball takes on California PA, exhibition game on which will be on Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock, Mackey Arena. It's a blanket question, but this team, even Dave Shondell said it's going to be interesting to watch just because there's so many new people, and not necessarily what you expect to see on Sunday, but what's important to get done here in these first few games. Purdue will get tested in November in Maui, certainly. This is going to be some important steps early to be able to start to build, not say your NCAA resume, that may be the cart before the horse, but build some equity up in your program, certainly.
Yeah, 6 guys are going to be playing their first Purdue basketball games on Sunday in the exhibition game. So I think the real value of these first couple of games is just having those guys kind of get the butterflies out, if there are butterflies at all, have them get acclimated to this level of play, this environment. Not that there's any comparison between playing California, Pennsylvania in an exhibition game and playing at Vanderbilt here in a couple months, or playing in Maui, or playing in the Big Ten.
State, yeah.
But at the same time, you want those guys have to get their feet wet, get acclimated, get used to playing with one another, just kind of get acclimated to the environment in general. So I think that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. And one thing you got to see this year, you got to see better chemistry. You have nowhere to go but up in that sense. But I really do think you're going to see a better passing team. You're going to see a more positive environment. You're going to see a group of upperclassmen who coexist much better with all of these newcomers, including 5 freshmen. And I think that's going to be the most interesting part of these early season games, is just seeing how quickly all these first-year guys acclimate to playing at the college level, but also playing with these guys they're going to be playing with now.
Yeah, and you were asked the question last week about which freshman you thought would play most, and I think you answered Vince Edwards. But this is a group that, is it safe to say this could be? I mean, not necessarily because of effort or chemistry, but just there's going to be some moving parts to this, to trying to figure out what works best with what personnel, I would think, and with Matt Painter's lineups.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about this year, what you've seen the last 2 years is Painter start. I think he started more than 20 lineups now.
Yeah.
In the past 66 games the last 2 years. So you've seen a lot of personnel groupings to start games. Now, there's a lot of circumstances behind that.
Mm-hmm.
There have been, obviously some struggles these past 2 years, and that's forced him to kind of search for answers. But I think more so than at any time the past couple of years, what you're going to see is specific groupings where, he's experimented with playing Haas and Hammonds together. I don't know how much that's going to happen. That seems pretty, I don't know if that's going to be something they can do full scale very often, but you're also going to see lineups where you have Kendall Stevens, Dakota Mathias out there together, in which case you almost have to change your defense. You have to play zone because of some of those guys' vulnerabilities, we'll say, kind of guarding the perimeter. At the same time, you might also have groupings out there that are a little bit better in man-to-man. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a lot of personnel groupings that are going to predicate how you play. So, I think that's going to be a consideration, too, when you determine starting lineups. So when you start off these exhibition games, you're going to try a lot of different things. You're going to play zone, you're going to play man, you're going to play different personnel groupings, see what system works best with what grouping. So, yeah, that's a huge portion of these early season games, too. At the same time, you can't put too much stock in some of these early season games because you cannot simulate the way the Big Ten game is going to be played. That's why, I would caution everyone to not put too much stock in A.J. Hammond's numbers. Maybe not his play, but his numbers early in the season, because early in the season, inevitably there's going to be a lot of small ball played because you don't see opponents that have the sort of size that a lot of Big Ten opponents in that style of basketball is going to present.
All right, well, that's going to be something that we'll be watching throughout the month of November. It seems like they have about 13 games in the month of November, and not quite that many, but the Boilermakers do start out to men's basketball tomorrow. The women will open up, I believe, a week from Sunday. Of course, the men will have its second exhibition game a week from today. So we'll be back next week. Brian Cardinal will be our guest, and we'll talk basketball and much, much more as we prepare for the Purdue-Wisconsin football game as well. All right, we will thank our guest, Dave Shondell, Kyle Charters, for joining us. And Brian Newbert as well. And we want to thank Kim and Gordon, our good friends at WLFI, for making this happen again today. And even Chad Evans for sitting in there with us. We appreciate that. The wind is not going to stop howling around here, but that's not Chad's fault. So he'll just report on it.
He's got control over it, though, right?
Yeah, well, he does. He does.
Got some say in the matter.
People do say that. That's
Come on, man.
Want to thank our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn, State Farm agent Trent Johnson, of course, John Basham and the good folks at Basham Reynolds, and Kerry and Greg Ayersman, the folks at Triple X and Route 66. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, Golden Black Live. If you missed part of the show, we'll have it archived on the site, on the WLFI site, and linked to our site around dinner time tonight. Thanks again. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on Golden Black Live.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah.